The purpose of this panel is to first to let the caucus leaders kind of talk about what they think their goals are for the session, and the second is to let you interact with them and ask them some questions about anything you have interest in. So our panel right now is President Scott Sale.
Just saying.
President Sales is serving is one of the longer serving legislators at this point in time. He served his full sentence in the House, ended as Speaker of the House, and then he came over to the Senate. And last session he was elected President of the Senate, and this session again he was elected President of the Senate. So he's one of the few folks that's had, well, maybe the only one that's had the distinction of being both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. But very few people have been President of the Senate twice also. So he's been involved in the leadership for quite a while now, and he represents a district that runs from Gallatin County all the way up here to Helena, so we have a pretty diverse constituency. And I think this is your last shot unless you go back to the House, or you've got one more.
This is it.
This is it. So I'll turn it over to President Sale and let him, he's a man of many words, so he can speak for a long time. We'll let him say what he wants to say. I might have a few questions for him, and then we'll see if some of the others show up.
Well, if you go back 12 years ago, I think it was the first time I got invited to speak to the Taxpayers Association. I was a newly minted Speaker of the House, and I gave one of the longest speeches of my life. I got up, what I call, refresh your memory, we had $1.2 billion worth of surplus in the 07 session. So it was a little different, on a much smaller base, I might add. So it was a pile of money. And I said, well, I let Senator Cooney speak first. I think he talked for about 30 minutes about all the ways that government was going to spend the money. And if I remember correctly, I said something like, it's your money and I'm going to try to give it back, and sat down. Well, I'm not going to make that promise this time. If you think back to 07, we were not very successful in giving any money back, let alone the lion's share of that $1.2 million. But the promise I'm going to make today is that we're going to try not to raise your taxes. And I think that I'm pretty safe in saying that. I've talked to the vast majority of the members of the Senate, and if not all of them. And I've communicated with the House leadership and many of the members over there as well. I don't think there's any appetite for Republicans to raise your taxes in the 19th session. So, you know, there's a saying that whenever the legislature's in session, your liberty and your treasure are at stake. So hopefully we can put your concerns to ease regarding your treasure. We're also going to live within our means from a budgeting standpoint. So fortunately, revenue has picked up, and oddly enough, that it looks like it's going to come in extremely close to what the legislature predicted in the 17th session, despite all the weeping and gnashing of teeth that the administration did over the last couple of years. So we didn't have to have a special session, and it's proving that we spent a lot of time and energy and money for that. So the governor's come out with a budget that looks very similar to the 17 budget, with a lot of the same revenue enhancers. We denied those requests in the 17th session for the most part. We did it again in the special session a year ago, November. And I anticipate that would be the same result going forward. Obviously, there's, with the failing of I-185, we're going to have a very interesting discussion regarding Medicaid expansion and what that might look like going forward. That's about it. I don't see a lot of changes. I think it's going to look quite similar to what we had in the 17th session in terms of the budgeting and the revenue. And I think it's steady as you go. So I think that's good news for the business community. I think that's good news for the citizens of Montana, that we have, in my opinion, a stable environment, and hopefully we can get through the 19th session without doing a lot of damage. And we can look forward to the 2020 election. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you folks might have.
This mic didn't work. Scott, somebody turn this off. Scott, I guess there's a couple things I'd like, if you wouldn't mind expounding on. And I think I pretty much know your view of the Medicaid expansion, but what's your analysis of what may happen with that as it goes through the process? And is there going to be some proposed changes? Just maybe what do you know about what's going on there and where that might end up?
Sure. I've never supported Medicaid expansion. In the 13 and 15 session, I voted against it both times. And it's the first time that in the nation, and particularly here in Montana, that it became incumbent upon the government to provide health care services for able-bodied people between the ages of 19 and 64. Financially, it's been a boon for the state to Medicaid expansion has, but in reality, we know that the dollars expended by the federal government to grant that benefit to citizens of Montana is paper mache. I don't think I probably need to remind you, we have our current account deficit that's growing substantially despite the fact that the federal government is raking in more federal revenue right now than at any other point in history. And yet we continue to run larger deficits, and that we have a roughly $200 trillion unfunded liability on Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. So opposed it not because it wasn't going to be short-term benefit to the state of Montana, which I think it has proved to be, but as an adult looking out to future generations of people, we can't afford it. And but that's not going to stop us from passing it again. So if I've been known to place a wager now and then, and I wouldn't bet against Medicaid expansion not surviving this session. I think it will continue. My goal, and I think a goal of quite a few other Republicans, is to add as many what I would consider to be positive sideboards to the program, which would be to have a meaningful work requirement when we have the unemployment numbers that we currently are experiencing. I don't think it's too much to ask for people to work a little bit. Certainly, I think we need to have means testing. So if you have means that you may not qualify for the program. Certainly asset testing. Just because you don't have any income, if you have millions of dollars worth of assets, I don't think you should qualify, but you currently do. And I think there should be some sort of drug testing. Now, some people say that this is going to be expensive and it's punitive, and I don't see it that way at all. I think drug testing is something that's positive, especially if you think that we need to identify these type of people that have a physical addiction to some sort of illegal or legal drug, and that hopefully we can try to help these people off their addiction and make them more productive citizens, and quite possibly that would get them into some sort of drug treatment. It's been my theory that if we can move people from a position of dependence to a position of independence, it's better for everyone. And the best thing that we can do for our people if they want health care is to help them find a good job and they can pay for it for themselves. So I anticipate that
a large portion of these ideas, maybe some more, are going to become part of the package. And it'll be interesting seeing all the horse trading that's done between the two offices and the governor's office to hopefully make the program more affordable, fair, and more accountable. So that's where I think it's going.
Do you think the expansion will be permanent or another temporary?
Well, I'd like to see a sunset on it, but in all honesty, sunsets I think are kind of they're just kind of window dressing. Once you give an entitlement to somebody, it's next to impossible to ever take it away. So in reality, you can put a sunset on it. I don't think I've ever, in the 16 years I've been observing the legislature, I've ever seen us really ever let any program ever go by the wayside. So I don't think this is probably going to be an exception to that rule.
Representative Beard, do you have any question?
Well, I have a question. A lot of people have been asking me, and it requires a little more clarification. What is the difference between Medicaid and expanded Medicaid?
Well, Medicaid traditionally has been a program for, I would call, a social safety net of sorts for people that are at least able for them to provide for themselves. And so, that would include people that either have some sort of infirmity and they are unable to work, or they're incapable of working, or something to the effect of that. So this Medicaid expansion basically was to cover, the way it's been explained to me, this uninsured portion of the population that didn't have access to medical treatment or couldn't afford it. So,
And in addition to that, the main difference is regular Medicaid is a 2 federal, 1 state dollar match. Expanded Medicaid is 9 federal and 1 state. And so it's a whole different deal. And if you kind of think down the road, how long will the federal government keep paying for 9/10 of one program when they're paying for 2/3 of the other one? That's the thing. And then, there's one more thing I can say, but I can't remember.
oh. Sorry about interrupting you there, but the other thing I might add is, I think there was about 15 million people that were moved from current Medicaid or traditional Medicaid to Medicaid expansion to try to, I'll just say it, milk the federal government out of additional dollars. So if Medicaid expansion was in, which I doubt it will, those people could they would go back to existing Medicaid in its current form.
Thanks for taking the time to visit with us. I'm just curious about your caucus's position on bonding as a tool for infrastructure. What's your reaction to the governor's proposal? Do you have a counter proposal in mind? How are you going to address that need that really hasn't been met really as far as a consensus over the last few sessions about that particular tool for investment?
That's a great question. The answer is I don't know. We haven't taken a caucus position on it. It certainly has been something that we have talked about or have talked about. We spend a lot of money on infrastructure currently, and then when you look at what counties and cities do, there's a lot of money spent on that type of activity. I think part of the problem is there's a disagreement within the Republican caucus what really constitutes infrastructure. Is it more government buildings, or is it, roads, bridges, sewers, water treatment, and the like, which traditionally has been more local, but certainly the state does help local governments with those type of activities. Could we borrow the money? I'm sure we could. We've been paying down bonds for a number of years. I can't remember the last time we actually passed a bonding bill. Even with low interest rates, and historically speaking, they're still low in comparison to where they've been, 10, 15 years ago. I guess you could argue that, there's a bargain to be had there, but debt's debt. And, we think we're pretty independent here in Montana. We like to consider ourselves as these rugged individualists that exist here, but we're not. 40% of the budget is federal dollars, and I'm not talking about Forest Service, BLM, and, federal highways, the Medicare, federal pensions and all alike that go into the economy here in Montana. And I'm talking about our state budget, 40+% is federal dollars. I would argue that we have a pension fund that isn't as robust and as well-funded as it might be compared to a lot of states who are in great condition. If you want to compare ourselves to Illinois, New Jersey, Kentucky. But I think it's somewhat of a myth to think that we're going to indefinitely have a 7.7% return on investment for the foreseeable future. I think that, what we've seen, I don't know what the market did today, certainly went down 800 points yesterday. What's that?
It was close.
Oh, wow, perfect.
No harm, no foul.
Maybe I lose my money today. But, I'm here to tell you that probably isn't going to be the case. I think it's optimistic. If you look at other states, they're reducing their annualized for projected rate of return because they know that, we were 7.75. We dropped it down to 7.7, I think. It's still, I think, up there a little too high, and we need to be good stewards of that. So there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of competition for funds. Debt is at an all-time high. For corporate debt's way up there. Obviously, the national debt's way up there. I don't like the position, even though I'm not trying to be a gloom and doomer. Actually, if you look at the pension funds, they've done extremely well, but we've had a historical run-up in the market. So, the debt scares me. And, but obviously it's going to get, you're right, the infrastructure is something that is going to continue to be discussed. And I'm not here to say that we don't need it. We do. We need great roads, we need great bridges, we need safety, we need clean water. These things are all important. But I think we need to do a better job of defining what critical infrastructure is. And once we get to that point where we can say this is critical and this is going to help the majority or a larger portion of the citizens of Montana, I think we'll get more agreement. That's a long-winded answer. I apologize.
Appreciate that.
Mary?
I would just like to get an update of what we know at this point of what's going to go on with school funding. And I know that there's from the Lieutenant Governor and Governor, there's going to be a big push again to add more preschool into the education service, which over the long run, I think they're looking for some federal dollars as well. And then over the long run, yes, we don't know those federal dollars will go away. And right now we don't have enough infrastructure, to my knowledge, to place a lot of those preschool children in the schools.
Did everyone hear the question? It really had to do with if we expand education down into preschool, is there enough infrastructure to support that without much cost there and start out another program funded with federal money, and then that money gradually goes away and it falls back on local taxpayers?
Well, I think you probably know my answer, how I'm going to vote. I've never voted for pre-K, and I'm not going to. That doesn't mean that there's other individuals within my caucus, certainly the Democrats, that support that program. So it's going to get debated just like everything else. I don't think we should increase our dependence on federal dollars, no matter how enticing they are. In fact, I think that states, and Montana in particular, since this is where I live and I have a fondness for the place, we should start weaning ourselves off the federal teat, not increase our dependence on them. In terms of K through 12, there's all kinds of formulas built in there where, inflationary and A and B increases are already in there. I'm confident that we're going to live up to our fiduciary responsibility to the schools. I don't see a lot of that we're probably going to play Santa Claus. I think we're going to give them what's coming, coming to them statutorily. Like I said, I hope we can resist the pre-K thing that we've done in the past. I will say one thing, and I'll probably take some heat for this, but I think our higher education system, you didn't ask this, but I'm going to volunteer it. This is probably a mistake, but boy, I think the state of Montana really needs to take an in-depth look at higher education. We have one school that is performing above standards, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about educational quality, but I'm talking about, fiscally and from an enrollment standpoint, which I think are all tied together. I think that, there is somewhat of a free market in higher education, and that students and parents vote with their feet and with their dollars, and that's why MSU, I think, is prevailing in many of the other schools. In fact, not many, all of them are suffering to some degree, some more than others. I'm opposed to freezing tuition. First of all, it costs us money, but more importantly, I think that we're at a real crossroads in education. I think people are starting to figure out that maybe a college education isn't the greatest value that it was. Like when I went to school, I felt like my college education benefited me tremendously. I think to a large degree, a bachelor's degree, depending on what you get it in, there's a diminishing return on that. And I think people are starting to realize that maybe quite possibly they're better served to go to trade school, become an electrician or a welder, or have been a truck driver. But there's a lot of vocations out there that pay immediately for a lot less investment. And I think a lot of our problem is with this education inflation that we've seen that's far exceeded the regular inflation in the general economy is because we've been too generous in supplying students with the opportunity to borrow money, and all that additional money that's been given to people, it just is provided, you have a limited supply, but if you increase the money over here, you're going to get what we've had, which is not wage inflation, we've had very little of that, but educational inflation. And it's just simply supply and demand. So with that said, I really think that if we need to take a really hard look, I doubt we're going to, but I think there probably will be, during the session, at least I think there'll be some sort of study that maybe we take a much deeper dive in the interim to take a look at higher education and the status of it in the state of Montana, and can we afford, all the schools that we currently have? And we have a pile of them, and they're scattered across the state.
Any other questions? Eric?
You haven't really said anything about property taxes. Do you want to share your thoughts on property taxes and what it may be doing to residential taxpayers?
They're too damn high. But, like down in my neck of the woods, I happen to be in the Bozeman School District. I live in the county. We never defeat any type of mill levy increase, and we're building an $80 or $100 million school right now, high school. I'm not saying it isn't needed, but it's expensive. We have open space bonds. We have open space. I can't remember. Maybe it's some sort of levy. I can't remember. Just passed. Building a new law and justice center a number of years ago. Now the city's going to build one. Unfortunately, I don't live in the city limits. Thank God. But it's kind of odd. I do hear that more than probably from anybody, or from my constituents more than anything, is the property taxes are too high. But somehow they continue to raise their own property taxes. So I do have sympathy for the people that vote no and complain. I have very little sympathy for those that vote yes and complain. But yeah, I agree. I think our property taxes are high, but they're, unfortunately, they're going higher. And until they get to a level where people feel enough pain that they start saying no. And I know they say no in other locations in the state, and even in Belgrade, which is just down the road from us, they are much more stingy. But the Bozeman residents are pretty generous in terms of what they'll support from a property tax standpoint.
Well, thanks, Scott. I apologize to the crowd as best I can for not having a full panel, but everyone was invited, and I guess they know where we're at, so probably more their issue than ours. This is going to kind of wrap up our program, but the reception, I think, is set up across the hall over there, so we'll just have a little more time to spend there than you normally would. We have a gift for you, Scott, so thanks for. And we want to thank all of you for coming. We hope you found this program informative and educational. That's what we try to do here. Private legislation, it's all pretty much focused on that issue. But again, we thank you for coming. Look forward to seeing you next year about the same time. As usual, the weather will be bad. Travel will be hard. We appreciate you coming. We appreciate all of those of you who came to present today and join us at the reception across the hall. Thank you.